Hello to all my viewers. Once again, we are back. The CxO story by LinkCxO. Today's episode is going to be even more interesting because we have with us Deepak Batra, who has done his engineering from IIT Delhi, followed by his MBA with INSEAD in France, which is one of the most prestigious B schools in the world, followed by stints with Bain, OLX, MagicBricks, to name a few. Welcome, Deepak, to our podcast series.
Thanks, Vinay. Thanks for having me.
What's a decision that you have made recently that has kept you up at night?
That's a very interesting question. And I think my answer will probably be a non-cliched answer here, which is that I'm done with decisions that keep me up at night. So what I'm really trying to say is I did, of course, one of the most recent moves for me has been, it's actually been a couple of years now, has been to move away from the usual full-time corporate leadership careers to set up my own advisory. And now I'm also running my own agency catering to US clients around design, websites development, overall branding strategy. So a very new field for me. I think that's probably been a plunge, so to say. So in that sense, tough decision from broadening the horizons or, just thinking out of the box, operating out of the box standpoint. But I won't say it's kept me up at night. It wasn't like an impulsive decision. It was something that I think I'd considered for a very long while. It's, of course, years of working that ends up giving you the luxury to try all of this out. So I think the combination of getting into a new career track, also followed by a change of location. So we recently moved to Goa, something again that had been on the cards for a very long time, and it's been 3 months, and it's lovely. So I think my sleep has gotten better.
It's wonderful. Wonderful to see somebody who started now as an entrepreneur now and having his own services called Saffron IT, as well as being based in Picture Perfect, Goa. What is your leadership style, which has evolved over time now that you are running an organization on your own?
Yeah, so I think whether it's the organization of my own or I often more recently have engaged with enterprises of pretty large size. And I think interestingly recently I also did a repeat MBTI assessment, which was probably happened after 2 decades almost. So again, also interestingly, I thought when we were doing MBTI for the first time that we were told MBTI doesn't change. You are who you are by and large. You may have some variations, small deviations, but there is a natural reversion to the mean. But in my case, I think I used to be an INTP, and it has become, I think, context of your question, where I was going was, I think I was lucky enough to get into managerial roles very soon in my career, and this was even more interesting because this was in context of management consulting. But I think I had a very left-brained, a very thinking-oriented, task-oriented, goal-oriented way of leading, which was not always feelings first. In fact, I think maybe a decade ago, I would have scoffed at the word feelings. And I think that's changed for me, which is it has become at least cognizant of feelings. And I don't mean to say, feelings in the sense of someone getting hurt by very small things or, someone generally feeling antsy, but more in terms of being empathetic from a human standpoint, understanding where people are coming from, what their motivations are. Also, I think, as is true for most people, you want to dish out treatment that you want to yourself, and that often ends up showing in leadership. So for me, a default style always has been very empowering and delegating instead of micromanaging or trying to light a fire to get things done. And I think over years I have probably become better at selecting places and assignments that match with that leadership style. And so I think I would call it more well-rounded. I continue to be goal-oriented, but I think it's more balanced now.
Nice. Very, very well said, Deepak. And now, what does good leadership look like in today's environment? Because it's a very often used word. Almost everybody talks about good leadership. What's your good leadership style?
Yeah. So at least in my books, I think a few qualities define good leadership, and it's honesty, integrity, leading from the front. When I say honesty, I think there's also transparency around it. Having an ear, at least demonstrating some empathy. I feel those traits, in line with what I was just telling you before, stand out a lot more for me.
Yes.
After, obviously having seen, I worked in like a pre-series A startup. I've also worked in a conglomerate, which is one of the largest in India. I've worked in management consulting. So I've seen, I think, a very, very wide range. I feel the leaders who stand out and, who are probably able to create a more sustained advantage are the ones who demonstrate these qualities. And I feel in a chaotic world, when things are very, very uncertain, some of these qualities become even more important than usual, in my opinion, because everyone seems to have, some sort of a baseline anxiety. Like I'd say if the anxiety was like at a certain threshold, the threshold has risen. Everyone's
Yes.
carrying a little bit of anxiety about, okay, AI, my job, what the future looks like, and suddenly geopolitically also it's so turbulent. So I think in such a scenario, the role that a leader can play in terms of calming nerves, in terms of giving a direction, in terms of being there for people. And therefore, I think a lot of those, I would say, integrity, honesty, earnesty, transparency, the humane side of the skills,
Yes.
I think come into play a lot. Also, maybe to define it a little by contrast, if there are leaders who are, let's say, a lot more selfishly oriented, it's uncertain for everyone. And as a leader, I feel, hey, I'm in trouble too. So maybe I'll hold my cards and I'll play something a certain way. And, it's me first. And people can be expendable. I just think, I think it's not a good long-term strategy anyway. And B, people see through it. Therefore, I think it's the difference probably will become even more stark.
I totally agree with you on that. From a growth and innovation perspective, how do you decide which ideas are worth investing in? How do you take that very rational call, or how does it lead you to a decision making?
So I think a lot of my stints in consumer internet had that question in some shape or form, and I would say two things around it. A, I think as much of a deep dive or a research, being very very comprehensive with what you're trying to do, and I say that because a lot of times there are adjacencies that sound obvious, that seem natural, but if it's only when you kick the tires and you understand what's underneath, what it takes, and the capability might be totally different from what you're used to. Simple things like there could be an ed tech company that suddenly has to now open or consider opening centers, coaching centers. Absolutely different business. You may, both are education, but absolutely different business. And so I think it behooves organizations and leaders to take a considered call, really do a very thorough analysis before even considering it. I think the second bit I'll call out is that works very well in particularly internet first environments is it's usually very low cost to do a pilot. An MVP doesn't take so much. So if you're able to engineer, a min viable product with a suitable cohort of users, you can run not just one, but multiple pilots. And we've actually done it in consumer internet in several of my roles, where we would have probably 4 hypotheses being tested in parallel, whether it's about pricing, whether it's about totally changing the product construct, whether it's about a new proposition, so on and so forth. So I think those two are the most important points for me. And I think related to the first point was also being very real. If you have the execution capability to do it, and also the stomach, because some ideas, it's a long battle, gestation cycle, requires pivots, needs resilience of entrepreneurship.
True, true.
One must just be clear about the appetite.
And what trends are overhyped versus underestimated right now? What's your take on it?
So I think I'll probably speak in context of what I am currently doing,
Yes.
which is AI is everywhere. I don't need to waste too many words on it. With reference to management consulting, I think a lot's been said. I've seen many articles that talk about how McKinsey, BCG, Bain are either a lot of layoffs will happen or they'll become very AI first. Someone cited a report by one of the big 3 consulting firms that they ran through Quillbot and they found that 90% of that report was created by AI, generative AI. I I feel that the trend is overhyped. Obviously, AI, generative AI, before agentic, I think let me just stick to generative. Generative has really lowered the threshold of getting started, going off the mark very quickly to a shallow level, and also covering a lot of depth pretty quickly. Getting like a first preliminary draft, framing, analysis, structure, insight. I think it's become really, really easy. But I've seen that when you get into deep analysis, because I have made very intricate proposals, I've done some client work. On an occasion, I was writing a medium complexity article, which was to do with the financial services industry, and I was using in this case Claude Cowork. Now, my experience was that there were places where it was brilliant because it gave me, just like I said, it gave me a foundation and a starting point and the width of things that I have to consider pretty quickly. But as we went through the iterations, it required a lot of supervisory input from me
Yeah.
to actually get it to the level that we are used to delivering as a management consultant. Like if I had just left it autonomously I think it would have been very easy to poke holes in the analysis. Very, very easy. So that I think is overhyped. I think the efficacy of generative AI in general in management consulting, I don't think it's there yet. It's probably a while away. It's very hard for even me to hazard a guess to say when or how, what it'll look like. And I think on the totally the other end of the spectrum, because at least I end up thinking of both these days. In general, models that are more offline, I will not always call them detox oriented, but I think there is this theme. Obviously, a lot of people have, given a shot to start digital detox retreats or workshops, just keeping their phones aside, talking for 2 hours or reading books together for 2 hours. So the trends are, they're showing, but I think there are probably very clean constructs that can be developed around it. And not all of them may directly be referred to as detox. There could just simply be ideas where a careful offline experience, which is immersive, can be really soothing in this age of super digital AI overload.
Yes. I think my take would be, at the end of the day, AI is something which we all have to embrace, whether we like it or not. It's at the end of the day, always Indians, always immersive, and always innovative too. For me, AI is that's what sums up actually. From a decision-making perspective, what's the hardest no that you have said in recent times? Any decision-making in the recent past where it was a difficult choice for you?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't that difficult, but it was a no that was a little tentative. Because I actually had a project out of Middle East that required a lot of in-person presence. That I think I was in closing stages of, so I was ready to get started with it. But unfortunately, the Iran fiasco started, and so I had to say no to that. The project was still on, so I think that was a bit of a mistimed, difficult no. For the lack of a better word.
I think between the Middle East and Goa, anyway, the latter. So I'm glad that you're in Goa. And continuing our series with more from a decision-making perspective, how do you ensure diverse perspectives are considered, especially when you're on your own and you're an entrepreneur yourself now? How do you make sure that everybody's contribution is valued?
So it's not easy. It's very hard, honestly. I'd say right up front, because I think I've come across this situation often in team scenarios. And a lot of times what ends up happening is, while people may have really brilliant ideas, they don't always have the same energy or vivacity to pitch the ideas the same way. And from my side, I think the mechanisms that I tried to deploy often, I think worked out fine for me, were usually in the team meetings that I was running. I think I did have a format of meeting where everyone had to give their point of view. We went around in circles. So even if it was a group discussion, it was a little bit of a moderated, controlled kind of a group discussion. Because I think I saw, even myself, when I started my career, I was generally very, very hesitant and shy about always sharing my ideas. And so I think I could also relate to that dynamic in a person. And so for me, I think that was one part of it, which is having those formats of meetings where everyone's speaking to you anyway. And I also, I think with my teams, I have always been in touch one-on-one pretty closely, inevitably, even when, it got slightly large. And that has particularly helped, because I think the one-on-one forum a lot of times unearths, at least on the most critical, let's say, decisions and questions and calls that you have to take, it unearths more candor and detail when people talk about it.
Great. I think from continuing with that a thought process from a culture and people point of view, since you are managing teams, what's one hiring mistake you'll never make again?
I think it's a trend of a hiring mistake more than a hiring mistake, which is chasing a deadline. I think deadline is often self-inflicted or sometimes externally imposed. But I think with decisions like hiring, one must bear in mind that you're taking a very long call. And at least personally, I have certainly on more than one occasion in my roles, because the pressure was so high, I think probably happens to in a lot of scenarios, that you tend to lower the bar a little bit, or you tend to say that, hey, maybe we'll just start with this. We'll figure it out. We'll wing it. I think there are some decisions that it's good to have clarity on, that winging is not a good strategy, because part of that decision is it's expensive and irreversible in a way. Because once you've locked in, a team, or at least a core team for a certain product line or a business, replacement reversals are pretty expensive.
Yes.
And you lose momentum. So I think it's more than a specific hiring mistake. I think it's the principle.
And what's something which employees wish leaders understood better?
I think it's a very varied answer. My experience, I think maybe in some of the recent, it has so happened that some of the recent workplaces that I've worked with have had a very strict policy around working from office, and very limited tolerance for remote working, like very, very limited, outlandishly limited. So I think in those peculiar cases, a lot of chatter that came from employees was hoping for, an understanding, hoping for empathy, that there are use cases, whether those are to do with family, kids, or sometimes, just not being well, or sometimes just needing a little bit of a different environment of flexibility that could actually help them perform better and be less at stress. Leadership or management in general to understand that, but I think it was very hard to convey, especially when there is a very strong top-down opinion that this leads to pilferage, again, for
Yeah.
the lack of a better word.
I don't know. As in, see, work from office also has its pluses. You're able to do a team bonding better. But then work from home is, for me, I think, work forever from home. The work never stops. As in, you're perennially on a non-pause button. It doesn't matter weekdays or weekends. So I think it has its pros and cons too. I think it's more of a management decision in organizations across India and other places. Coming to my next query from you would be, how do you stay aligned across different departments? How are you clued in with what's happening? Are you a very hands-on person, or how do you manage it?
I am. In fact, again, I think it so happens that post consulting, all my roles have had, by definition, a very cross-functional aspect to it. Because, in one of the roles, I was leading a digital subscription product, which involved product, technology, analytics, design, a little bit of marketing, customer support. So all of those functions together. On other occasions, even when I was doing roles that had to do with enterprise advisory, because I was playing a governance role, governing the transitions that were happening, ensuring that we were on track. A lot of my roles have designing KPIs, OKRs, essentially, bridging that gap between what is said in strategy per se and how is that going to translate at least to the level of what targets look like across the key functional areas. So pretty much almost all of my roles have involved that aspect because that's what I do. And I think that inherently ends up putting me in a position where I have to be abreast of what's going on in each function, what are the most important initiatives, goals, where are the biggest roadblocks? Because I think I've been in roles where I've been reviewing those functions myself, or I've at least, let's say, helping the leadership team align on those functions. So I think it's really a lot about the cadence, discipline, and the forums. In general, a lot of companies end up coming from a legacy of very siloed,
Yes.
function, a little bit of fiefdoms and siloed functional areas. But I think I find that it could literally take, a very small team, sometimes even a single person who's full-time dedicated to this initiative, if they're able to a little bit play their cards right, to start at least weaving a thread through
Yeah.
and bringing it together. Because I don't think, not even now, I think it's probably been more than a decade or so that organizations by nature have become matrixed. There's always something going on that requires 3, 4 functional areas to coordinate together. Any new product launches, any new product initiatives, customer initiatives end up needing input from literally all the functions. So I think a lot of I would say employees have also become more fungible and more attuned to being free electrons that end up conducting.
From a industry and future outlook, what major shift will redefine your industry in the next 5 years?
I think I don't think this shift has a monopoly on my industry, so to say. Let's say consulting or execution,
Yeah.
governance, or even design. I think this theme of man-machine combination, which is what, let's say, a mid-management employee of 5 years later looks like, or what even before that, what the entire organization or the hierarchy looks like. Uh,
Yeah.
because it's not too hard to imagine a future where it's a relatively, very flat organization, like a tree structure kind of an organization, where it's really, there is sort of decision making, there is some sort of a management, and then there is probably staff that works very well with machines. That's again very replaceable, fungible, can do many things, are very well acquainted with the tools, and the bulk of heavy lifting is actually being done by AI,
Yeah.
whether agentic, generative, whichever form. And I think it's bound to happen in some shape or form. I think it's only the intensity that remains to be seen. Even again, in one of my last roles with a large enterprise, we were literally working on a 3-layer structure of future, where we said, this is all we see of a pyramid. There's a decision maker, ultimate decision maker, who has the overview of literally everything, whether it's the promoter of a group or CEO of a business unit, whichever way you want to define it. There's a little bit of a management layer which sits between, like, let's say, CxOs of today and one level down.
Yeah.
And then there is a larger, a little bit more of a worker layer, for the lack of a better word, that's working really well with machines and the work has moved from a lot of basic administration or hiding behind slides or data or lack of data or errors in data to having most of the things in place and just putting your mind to decision making, to trade-offs, to the future.
From a personal insight perspective, how do you manage stress and avoid burnout? I'm sure that that's something which is the need of the hour for all of us.
It is. I think, again, personally for me, what works really well is just committing to myself that I'm going to dedicate 1 to 2 hours on offline activity, that is either going to the gym or it's walking or it's sitting and breathing or whatever it is. But at least to simplify, what I've done for myself is I've said this is a daily commitment that has to be done. And I've even given myself the flexibility so that, it doesn't feel so straitjacketed that sometimes one tends to escape from those kind of commitments that feel suffocating, that, okay, enough of this boring stuff every day. And therefore, I feel that as a mechanism helps, which is to say that if you believe that you want to de-stress, if you believe you want to be healthy, the minimum commitment that you should be able to make to it is whatever the time is, 1 hour every day.
Yeah.
Then have 5 alternatives to what you'll do. You don't even have to commit to one. Give yourself the creative freedom, liberty, whatever. Not keep it monotonous, but at least do that. So that's really what I try to follow, and I think I try to keep an eye on switching off, so to say. While it's very hard, especially when you're chasing deadlines, sometimes you can't help but end up working in the wee hours of the night also. But I try to keep those days at a minimum, because I think if you try to do that balance every day, day is a little bit of a natural logical unit, then I think it accumulates. Then you're able to keep it at bay so far as realistically managed.
And a tricky one, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I think to my younger self, I would say find more ways for things to compound. And I say that in perspective of I was pretty late personally to financial awareness, as an example. Just the various investment vehicles, having a portfolio strategy for yourself, being very, very goal oriented to say by age 43, by age 47. Sure, I always knew the directional plan, and sure, it involved getting to freedom someday, for the lack of a better word. But as good as I was at financial modeling for my clients, I think that's a modeling that I started late personally. And I take it as an example because, compounding applies really well to finances. It's the simplest application of compounding, while it applies to everything in life. And I think so. My directional advice to my younger self would have been to realize and identify compounding and its power earlier. And I think one part was finances that I just spoke about. The second part also is I feel there were probably 1 or 2 occasions where I pursued certain initiatives but gave those up pretty soon.
Yeah.
Whereas it's very, in hindsight, vision is always 20/20, but it's very easy to see now that, even a slow burn perseverance on 1 or 2 of those initiatives could have compounded to a really large setup today. And so I think that's really the advice to the younger self.
The last segment is going to be fun and engaging. It's our rapid fire. One word to describe your leadership style.
Earnest.
Earnestness. Okay. Book that changed your perspective.
I would say One Thing.
Okay.
The book called One Thing.
Yeah. And biggest myth about being a CxO?
That you can relax and not need to be in the details.
And what's your morning routine? Strict or flexible?
Strict on a committed time spent at healthy activities, flexible in what I do.
And one skill that you would recommend every future leader must learn?
Deep breathing.
This was a really engaging session, Deepak. Thank you so much for being part of our podcast series. And to all our viewers, coming up very shortly, one more riveting episode by us, the CxO story by LinkCxO. Thank you very much.